What are the core concepts and ideas of the book Corrected, and do I recommend to read it? Hi everyone, my name is Johannes and welcome to this channel. Welcome to Mastering Consulting. On this channel I share my learnings of my own current journey in management consulting to help you to become successful in consulting while also living a balanced life. And if you're new to this channel, then please make sure to subscribe to it. Also, please leave a thumb up. This will help you that you don't miss any new video here on this channel. And today we will make a book summary of the book Corrected. So I would say let's directly start. Let's talk about the book Corrected. And I want to start by giving you some background information. So first of all, it was written in 2018. The authors were Bernard Garrett, Corey Phelps and Oliver Sivony, and they have a background. They usually come actually from the universities of HEC, a very renowned business school in France, McGill University, and they also have consulting background. They worked for McKinsey. And the main goal of the book is to teach you how to solve problems. You see, they have a background in academics and in consulting, and they learned how they actually solve problems, and they tried to write a book where they really got to the core of problem solving. They developed an approach that they introduced into the book. So definitely this book is for everyone who wants to learn how to solve problems, and this means people who are starting in the business or especially for consultants. And what I want to do is that I first want to talk a little bit about the structure of the book. So the structure is mainly in 4 parts. So the first one is the introduction. There they give you some background about problem solving. So they talk about what problem solving actually is and what people usually do wrong if they want to solve problems. Okay. So at the end, just to summarize, problem solving is at the core of actually any business activity or management activity, because whenever you are a manager, your main job is to solve problems. And that's the same as it is if you work in consulting. But also people can make a lot of mistakes if they want to solve problems. So for example, they don't state the problem in the right way. So this means that they try to solve a problem without even knowing what the problem is. Or maybe they don't have a structured approach. So this means that they forget something and come to the wrong solution and they oversee something. And these are typical issues or typical mistakes that you can make if you want to solve business problems. And that's why it is so important to have a structured problem-solving approach. And this is basically chapter 1 and 2 of the book. Then chapter 3, then they introduce the 4S framework. And we will talk about that in a minute. And that's the core concept of the book. Okay, so they talk about the 4S problem-solving method. Then the large body of the book is basically chapter 4 to 11. And there they go into very detail of the 4S framework. Okay, so they go through it step by step. It's a really detailed explanation with a lot of examples, with a lot of illustrations, and they really go through it from the beginning to the end. And at the end, in chapter 12, they give you some kind of case studies to make it, you know, really illustrative for you to kind of understand the 4S method to solve problems. We talked about the structure. I think it's now time to talk about the core concept of this book. And the core concept is basically a concept on how to solve problems. And this they call the 4S method. And why do they call it the 4S method? It's basically very simple, because they say in order to have a structured problem solving approach, or the problem solving approach that they suggest or recommend, is based on 4 steps that they all begin with an S. So first of all, you have to state the problem, then you have to structure the problem, then you have to solve it, and afterwards you have to sell it. Okay, so what do they mean by it? So basically, and I can confirm this from a practical experience that I have in management consulting, this is like a very typical problem solving approach that you can have. Okay, so first of all, you try to state it. So this means that you try to understand the problem. Okay, it's really important that before you start the problem solving process, that you really think about, okay, what the problem actually is. And in the book they introduced the Tosca framework. If you're interested in that, I also made another video about where I go into very detail about the Tosca framework. So I highly recommend to understand it, because if you don't state the problem right, then you go into the completely wrong direction at the beginning. Then the second step is that you structure the problem, okay? And this is very, very important. And this is usually where consultants use tools like, you know, formulating hypothesis, or maybe using an issue tree or something like that. This is also where, you know, consultants typically apply a concept that is called MECE. And you know, this is typically the part where you structure the problem and really try to, you know, break down the big issue into smaller sub issues. So this makes it easier for you to solve it. Then the third step is that you solve the issue, and that basically means that you do all the analysis that is necessary in order to solve the project, okay, the problem. Okay, so after you structured it, you try to find an analysis for each of those sub-problems and try to you know, find out what the potential solution might be. And this is typically the core of the project, okay, because stating the problem and structuring it is typically like the first part of the project. This can be done within a relatively short time, and then, you know, the finding the solution and solving the problem is actually, in every consulting project, the biggest part. And at the end, and don't forget that, because this is obviously also a very important part, is that you sell your solution. Because you can have the best solution ever, if you cannot sell it and if you cannot convince the client that this is a good solution, then obviously, you know, the work that you did was kind of worthless. Okay, so it's very important to also think about the sell side of the project. Then to go one step deeper, one thing that I really liked about the book was that they didn't just only talk about, you know, this very simple problem-solving approach. Because if you read books like the McKinsey Way, or if you followed my videos, you know, this kind of problem-solving approach is very typical. Like, I like to talk about the three-step problem approach that is about structuring, analyzing, and communication. But as you see, you know, it's more or less the same concept. But one thing that was also very new to me was that you can distinguish within this problem-solving process between three cases, okay? And they say, depending on in what situation you are, you can either follow the hypothesis-driven path, the issue-driven path, or the design thinking path. And I found this concept to be very interesting, because they say, okay, if you can define what the problem is, and you also think that you have a solution, then you follow the hypothesis-driven path. And this could be, for example, that you know, if you come to a client and the client says, okay, we are not profitable anymore, and you already think, okay, this might have to do with the revenues and maybe certain product lines, then you could formulate hypothesis. And then throughout the analysis phase, you would try to test your hypothesis. Okay, so this is the hypothesis-driven path. Then if we have the second case where you say, okay, you can also again define a problem, like, okay, the company is not profitable anymore, but you don't think, or you don't have an idea what the solution could be, so you do not know if it's the revenue or if it's the cost. Then you can do an issue tree or an issue-driven path. And this means that you lay out a typical issue tree, as you do it very often in consulting. This means that you divide like profitability into all of the cost drivers, into all of the revenue drivers, and then in the analysis phase, that you really go through each of those positions and do a analysis. Okay, and this is the second path. And then the third path, and this was very, very new to me, was the design thinking path. And this is for problems where you don't know actually what the problem is. And this is also what you know, you typically summarize as an agile approach, okay, a very sprint-based approach, where you don't know exactly what the problem is, and you try to have an iterative approach to get to a solution. And I read the book like 4 years ago, and back then it was very new to me because I haven't heard about those three paths. But afterwards, you know, I can tell you that after 4 years of experience, I kind of applied these methods and different paths in various different scenarios, okay? And this actually helped me a lot, and kind of, you know, really enriched my consulting toolbox. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about how I like the book, how I, you know, what I really liked a lot, what I didn't like that much. So let's talk about the pros first, okay? So what I really liked about the book was that it was a really in-depth explanation of the problem-solving approach, okay? So the book has roughly, I don't know how many pages, roughly 250 pages, and it's only about problem solving, okay? So it's a very, very detailed description, the most detailed problem solving book that I know. This is what I really liked. As I just said, I also really liked that they differentiated into those 3 paths, okay? So I think this was kind of very enriching to learn about these different approaches, okay? So this is also what I liked a lot. I also liked the style of the book, because it was very well structured, very nice headlines, was always giving examples. So you definitely saw, you know, that this book was written by consultants, because the structure was so well, and it was really, you know, very, very easy to read. So those were the big pros that I see for this book. If you talk also a little bit, what I didn't really like was that the book was too complex for beginners. So if you're completely new to this consulting world, then I would probably more recommend a book like The McKinsey Way, because they also talk about problem solving, but it's not that complex like in the book Cracked It, okay? So the Cracked It is probably like more for people who already have some experience in problem solving. It's definitely not a beginner's guide, because, you know, for me, it's too complex, you know, because if you think consulting is that complex, you know, in real life, it's just, you know, enough if you know about the 4S method and, you know, don't understand every single step. And, you know, as I said, in this book, I think they make it a bit much too complicated for beginners. Also, what I didn't really like, but this is only for consultants, so if you just want to learn about problem solving, this is certainly good. But again, if we talk about consulting beginners, then you have to understand that this book also, you know, just talks about problem solving. So it doesn't talk about consulting. It doesn't talk about, you know, any tips for doing presentations. So, you know, it's really only focused on the problem solving approach. I know this, you know, was basically the intention of the book, but nevertheless, if you are a beginner, then maybe I would start with a different book. What kind of rating would I give it to? Would I give this book? And I introduced a 5-star rating, so 5 is the maximum, and I would give 4 stars. Okay, so it's definitely a recommendation. It's kind of a more advanced version of the McKinsey Way, particularly if we talk about the problem solving part of the McKinsey Way. So, you know, I think it's the most detailed book that I've read about problem solving, so it's definitely recommended. I don't give 5 stars because, you know, as I just said, I found it to be a bit too complicated, and, you know, it's not really for practitioners, because, you know, if you are in a very busy consulting project, then you cannot follow you know, this very structured approach that they lay out. You know, there I would have liked it, you know, if they would propose a bit more, you know, hands-on solution maybe. So that's why I only give 4 stars. Nevertheless, I highly recommend to buy the book. So this is definitely a book that, you know, where every consultant can learn from, and that's why it's definitely a recommendation. So of course, I'm interested what you think about the book. Cracked It. Have you read it? Do you want to read it? So please leave it in the comments. With that being said, if you like the video, then please leave a thumb up. Also subscribe to this channel. And with that being said, have a wonderful and a very successful day. Talk to you soon. Goodbye, Johannes.